You know what they say about listening at doors, you might hear something you don't like. Well, when I heard my daughter-in-law Melissa whispering to my son Michael through my bedroom door, "The sooner we get her into Shady Oaks, the sooner we can list the house," I knew I'd been right all along about what they were up to. They thought I was losing my marbles, you see, shuffling around in my house slippers, forgetting people's names, staring off into space when they talked to me. But here's the thing, and this is where it gets good: every single confused look, every time I forgot to take my pills, every blank stare I gave them, that was all me putting on an act. And the whole time, I was recording every word they said. Can you believe it? There I was supposedly losing my mind, and meanwhile I'm pulling off the smartest thing I've ever done in 72 years of living. But let me back up here, because this whole mess didn't start with nursing home talk. Oh no, this goes way back, and if you're going to understand how I got them good, you need to hear the whole story from the beginning. It really started 3 years ago when my Harold died. Heart attack, just like that. One minute he's reading the newspaper at breakfast, telling me about some article on the stock market. Next minute he's clutching his chest and falling forward onto the table. 47 years of marriage, and suddenly I'm rattling around in this big house all by myself. Well, I say rattling around, but honestly I liked the quiet at first. Gave me time to think, you know? Time to remember all the good times Harold and I had in every room of that house. See, this wasn't just any house we're talking about. Harold and I bought this place in 1976 as newlyweds. Well, we'd been married 2 years, but we were still acting like newlyweds back then. 3 acres of land in what was basically the middle of nowhere at the time, but Harold had vision. "Martha," he used to say, "this area is going to grow and we're going to grow with it," and boy was he right about that. What used to be farmland and empty lots is now one of the most expensive neighborhoods in our whole city. We put everything we had into that house. And I mean everything: our savings, our weekends, our dreams. Harold did most of the carpentry himself. Those built-in bookshelves in the living room? That's Harold's handiwork. The stone fireplace? He laid every single stone, said he wanted it to last forever. The deck out back where we used to have barbecues every 4th of July? Harold and his brother Tommy built that the summer Michael turned 16. And the garden, oh, you should see my garden. Harold planted most of the mature trees himself, back when they were just little saplings. The apple tree by the kitchen window that gives us shade in the summer and apples for pies in the fall, that was his idea. The rose bushes along the front walk, he planted those for our 10th anniversary, because he said I deserved to see something beautiful every time I came home. This house isn't just where we lived, it's where we raised our children. Michael took his first steps right there in the living room, from the couch to Harold's arms. Our daughter Sarah learned to ride her bicycle in our long driveway, Harold running alongside her holding the seat until she was ready to go on her own. Every Christmas morning for 47 years happened around the tree in our front window. Every birthday party, every family gathering, every important moment of our lives together. So when Harold died and I was left alone in all that space with all those memories, you can understand why I wasn't exactly jumping at the chance to sell it and move somewhere smaller. This wasn't just real estate to me. This was my whole life, everything Harold and I had built together. But wouldn't you know it, the day after Harold's funeral, the very next day, mind you, here comes my son Michael with his wife Melissa, and they want to talk about me downsizing. That's what they called it, downsizing. Like I was some corporation that needed to cut costs instead of a woman who just lost her husband and wanted to grieve in the home they'd shared for nearly half a century. So there's Michael sitting at my kitchen table, same table where I helped him with his homework for 12 years straight, same table where we used to have our heart-to-heart talks when he was a teenager going through his difficult phase, and he's got this look on his face. You know the look I mean, where someone's trying to look concerned but there's something else underneath. Something that doesn't quite match the words coming out of their mouth. And Melissa's sitting right beside him, holding one of my coffee mugs like she owns the place. These were mugs Harold and I picked up at a craft fair about 20 years ago, each one hand-painted by some local artist. Not expensive or fancy, but special to us because we chose them together. And here's Melissa, handling my mug like it's just any old cup, nodding along with everything Michael says like they'd rehearsed this conversation ahead of time. "Mom," he says, and already I don't like his tone because it's not the way he usually talks to me. It's the voice you use with children or people you think can't understand complicated things. You don't need all this space anymore. Think about the upkeep, the yard work, the property taxes. Harold always handled those things, didn't he? Wouldn't you be more comfortable somewhere smaller? Somewhere with people your own age who understand what you're going through. Now, I should mention here that Melissa's eyes are just wandering all over my kitchen while he's talking. Looking at the cabinets Harold and I saved up to replace in 1989. Looking toward the living room with the high ceilings and that stone fireplace he built with his own hands. Her gaze keeps moving like she's taking inventory, and there's something about the way she's looking at everything that makes my skin crawl a little bit. At the time I thought, well, maybe she's just admiring our handiwork. Harold and we put a lot of love into this house and it shows. People are always commenting on the craftsmanship, the attention to detail. But then I notice she's not looking at things the way you look at something beautiful that you appreciate. She's looking at things the way you look at merchandise you're thinking about buying. There's a calculating quality to it that I don't like, though I can't quite put my finger on why. I appreciate your concern, I told them, trying to keep my voice steady because the truth was I was still pretty torn up about Harold and wasn't thinking as clearly as I usually do. But I'm not ready to think about moving yet. I need time to grieve, time to figure out what life looks like without your father. This house. It's all I have left of him right now. And Michael, his whole expression just changed. Just for a second, but I saw it. This little tightening around his eyes, like he was irritated that I wasn't jumping at his suggestion. Like my perfectly reasonable desire to stay in my own home was somehow inconvenient for him. It was gone so fast I almost thought I'd imagined it, but I've been reading my son's face since the day he was born, and I know what I saw. Of course, Mom. Melissa pipes up with this voice like honey poured over ice cubes, if you know what I mean. Sweet on top but cold underneath. We completely understand. We just want what's best for you. It's just that we worry, you know? This house is so big and you're all alone now. What if something happened and no one was here to help? And then she squeezes Michael's arm and something about that squeeze felt. I don't know how to explain it exactly, but it felt strategic. Like a signal. I should have paid more attention to that squeeze because looking back, that was probably when I should have realized they were working as a team with an agenda I wasn't part of. But grief does funny things to your mind, makes you doubt your own perceptions. I was still reaching for Harold's hand in the middle of the night, still setting out 2 coffee cups every morning out of habit. So when my son and daughter-in-law expressed concern about my living situation, I figured it was coming from a place of love, even if their timing was terrible and their approach was all wrong. Well, they kept coming back to it. Every visit, every phone call, somehow we'd end up talking about my situation. That's what they started calling it, my situation. Like being a widow living in her own home was some kind of problem that needed to be solved instead of just life. The life I was living and trying to figure out how to keep living without Harold. The house was too big, they said. Too isolated. Too much for a woman my age. That phrase started showing up a lot. A woman your age, like hitting 70, meant I'd suddenly become incapable of the things I'd been doing perfectly well for decades. What if I fell down the stairs? What if I forgot to lock the doors? What if I left the stove on? What if I couldn't handle the yard work? What if? Every conversation was full of these hypothetical disasters, these terrible things that might happen to me because I was living alone in a house I'd been taking care of for 47 years. And gradually I didn't notice it at first, they started making me question my own competence. Started making me wonder if maybe they were right, maybe I was too old to handle things on my own. And Melissa, oh, she was good at this. Real good. She had this way of making you feel terrible for not agreeing with her, like you were being unreasonable and stubborn if you didn't see things her way. Martha, honey. And I started to hate how that sounded coming from her, like she was talking to a child or someone who couldn't think for themselves. I worry about you all alone in this big house. You're so independent, probably too independent to ask for help when you need it. That's what we love about you. But it's also what scares us. See how she did that? Made my independence sound like a character flaw instead of a strength. Made my perfectly reasonable desire to stay in my own home sound like dangerous stubbornness. She had a gift for twisting things around so that what should have been respected became something to be worried about. I'm telling you, the woman could have sold ice to Eskimos and made them feel grateful for the privilege. And Michael would nod along with everything she said, like she was speaking perfect sense instead of trying to undermine my confidence in my own abilities. My own son, who I'd raised to be independent and self-sufficient, was now telling me that independence in a woman my age was something to be concerned about. The conversations became more frequent and more intense over the next few months. They'd show up on weekends with real estate flyers talking about how much houses in the area were selling for, pointing out all the equity I was just sitting on, instead of using productively. They'd bring up friends of theirs whose parents had made smart decisions about downsizing before they had to, always this implication that it was just a matter of time before I wouldn't be able to choose for myself anymore. Things really picked up after I had a little fender bender about 6 months after Harold passed. I was distracted thinking about whether I should plant tomatoes again that year when I wasn't sure I'd be around to see them grow. You know how your mind wanders when you're grieving and everything feels uncertain? And I bumped into someone at a red light. No big deal, minor damage happens to everyone. But suddenly this was proof that I was declining. "See, Mom," Michael says when he picks me up from the accident scene, and there's something almost like relief in his voice, like he's been waiting for something like this to happen. These things happen when we're under stress. When we have too much on our minds, too much to worry about. Maybe it's time to seriously consider your options. Your options. Like I was a problem that needed solving instead of a person who'd had a minor accident after 55 years of perfect driving. Like one small mistake erased decades of competent behavior and proved I was no longer capable of managing my own life. But here's where I started getting really suspicious. I'm watching them during these conversations about my declining abilities, and I notice they're not just talking to me, they're talking to each other. Little looks, little nods, the way Melissa would touch Michael's arm when she wanted him to say something specific. The way they'd exchange glances when I said something they could twist into evidence of confusion or poor judgment. This wasn't just spontaneous family concern happening in real time. This was a coordinated effort, a planned campaign with talking points and strategies. They weren't just worried family members having natural conversations about an aging parent. They were executing a plan. And that's when it hit me like a ton of bricks. My own son and his wife were scheming to get me out of my house. My house. The house Harold and I bought as newlyweds, where we raised our kids, where we celebrated every Christmas and birthday and anniversary for 47 years. The house that was probably worth 10 times what we'd paid for it, sitting on land that had become some of the most valuable real estate in the city. They weren't worried about my safety or my happiness or my well-being. They were worried about all that equity just sitting there, tied up in a house owned by an old woman who might live for another 20 years and leave it to someone else in her will. So I decided to give them exactly what they seemed to want. A confused old lady who couldn't take care of herself. If they needed me to be incompetent to justify their plan, then incompetent is what they'd get. But while they thought they were gathering evidence of my decline, I'd be gathering evidence of their scheme. It started small. I'd pause in the middle of sentences like I forgot what I was saying, then smile apologetically and change the subject. I'd ask the same question twice in one conversation, then look embarrassed about my forgetfulness. I'd look puzzled when someone mentioned something that happened last week, like I couldn't quite place it in my memory. I'd misplace my keys and make a big show of looking for them, getting all worried and flustered about whether I was losing it. And you should have seen how Michael and Melissa looked at each other during these little episodes. Like they were keeping score or something, adding up points on some invisible scoreboard. Every time I acted confused, every time I seemed uncertain or forgetful, I could practically see them thinking, "Perfect, more evidence for our case." But while they thought I was losing my mind, I was actually getting smarter about what they were up to. I started reading up on elder law, learning about conservatorship and guardianships, basically all the legal ways people can take control of an older person's life. I learned about estate planning, asset protection, elder abuse. And boy, did I learn some scary things that opened my eyes to what was really happening here. Did you know that family members are responsible for 90% of elder abuse cases? 90%. And that adult children steal something like $36 billion from their parents every year? $36 billion. With a B. I couldn't believe it at first, but there it was in black and white from government studies and elder rights organizations. And the most common way they do it? They convince everyone, including sometimes the older person themselves, that the parent is incompetent and needs someone else to make decisions for them. They point to normal signs of aging, like occasionally forgetting names or being less steady on your feet, and they turn those into evidence of serious cognitive decline. They manufacture incidents, exaggerate minor mistakes, and gradually build a case that their parent can't be trusted to manage their own affairs. Then they swoop in with legal action, get themselves appointed as guardians or conservators, take control of everything, sell the house and stick mom or dad in the cheapest nursing home they can find while they pocket the proceeds. And the worst part? They convince themselves they're doing it out of love and concern, that they're protecting their parent from their own poor judgment. That's when I realized what I was dealing with. This wasn't misguided concern or overly protective behavior. This was a textbook case of financial elder abuse in progress. And I was not about to let them get away with it. So I got smart about it in a way they never saw coming. I went to the electronics store, one of those big box places where they sell everything from computers to security systems, and told the young man working there that I needed to set up some home security. My husband had passed away, I explained, and I wanted to make sure I'd have a record if anything happened in my house. He showed me these little recording devices, the kind people use for home security systems. Tiny things no bigger than a matchbox that you can hide anywhere. They're motion activated and can record both audio and video. And the really clever part is they upload everything automatically to the cloud. That's this internet storage thing that keeps your files safe, even if something happens to the device itself. These will give you complete coverage of your home, the young man explained. And you can access all the recordings from your computer or even your phone. The quality is excellent, and they'll run for months on a single battery charge. I bought 6 of them. Cost me almost $800, but it was the best money I ever spent. I put them all over my house, in places where Michael and Melissa had their most candid conversations. One in the kitchen where they liked to sit and talk while they thought I was busy elsewhere. One in the living room, where they'd often continue their discussions after I'd supposedly gone to bed. One out on the front porch where they'd sometimes step outside to talk privately. One in the dining room, where they'd spread out their real estate flyers and nursing home brochures, like they were planning a military campaign. These gadgets were motion activated and uploaded everything to the cloud automatically. I may be 72, but I'm not stupid about technology. The young man at the store explained everything very clearly, and I took notes so I wouldn't forget any of the important details. Modern technology is pretty amazing when you use it right, and I was about to use it very right indeed. I also started keeping a detailed journal of every interaction I had with Michael and Melissa. Every conversation, every visit, every phone call, every time they tried to make me feel incompetent or confused, I wrote it all down. Dates, times, exactly what they said when I could remember it word for word. What they wore, who else was there, what the weather was like, anything that might be important later. I took pictures of my house, inside and out, to document that it was clean and well maintained. I photographed my important papers to show they were organized and up to date. I took pictures of myself doing normal daily activities, cooking, gardening, reading, managing my bills, to prove I was capable of independent living. I was building a case file, though they had no idea what I was up to. While they thought they were documenting my incompetence, I was actually documenting their conspiracy against me. Meanwhile, I kept playing the confused old lady. And let me tell you, it was harder than you might think. You try acting scattered and helpless when you're actually planning the most sophisticated operation of your life. You try pretending to be forgetful when you're remembering every detail of a complex legal strategy. But I did it, and I did it well because the stakes were too high to make mistakes. The pressure from them kept getting worse as the months went by. Michael started calling every single day to check on me, always with the same questions. Did I take my pills? Did I remember to eat lunch? Did I lock the doors? Did I turn off the stove? Like I was a child who couldn't be trusted with basic tasks I'd been handling perfectly well for 70 years. And the questions got more detailed and more invasive over time. What did I have for breakfast? Did I remember to water the plants? Had I paid my bills this month? Was I feeling confused about anything? Each question designed to catch me in some mistake or inconsistency that could be used as evidence of my declining mental state. I just worry about you, Mom, he'd say every time I showed any irritation with his constant monitoring. I know you've always been independent, but things change as we get older. There's no shame in needing help. But this wasn't offering help. This was looking for problems, creating problems where none existed, turning normal human forgetfulness into signs of serious cognitive decline. And Melissa started just showing up unannounced, letting herself in with the spare key I'd given them for emergencies. Just wanted to see how you're doing, Martha, honey. she'd say. But then she'd find reasons to go through my mail, check my kitchen cupboards, look through my checkbook. Always with some excuse about helping me stay organized or making sure I wasn't forgetting important things. She'd look for expired food in my pantry and act concerned if she found a can of soup that was past its date, even though everyone knows canned goods are fine for months after the expiration date. She'd go through my bills and question perfectly normal expenses, acting worried if I'd spent money on anything she didn't think was necessary. One day she's standing in my kitchen with my checkbook in her hands, my checkbook. And she says with this tone like she's discovered something terrible, "Martha, honey, I noticed you paid your electric bill twice this month. And this check to the grocery store, the amount doesn't look right to me." I look at the check she's holding like it's evidence of a crime. $47 for a perfectly normal grocery trip to buy food for one person for a week. Nothing wrong with it at all, completely reasonable amount for someone shopping for basics. "It just seems like a lot for groceries for one person," she says, frowning at my checkbook like she's a bank examiner who's found evidence of fraud. "Are you sure you meant to write $47? Maybe you meant to write 17. Can you believe the nerve?" She's trying to make me think I can't write a check for groceries, that I'm so confused I don't know the difference between $17 and $47. Like I haven't been managing my own finances successfully for 50 years. But I played along because this was exactly the kind of thing I needed them to do on camera. I let myself look confused, uncertain, maybe a little embarrassed. "I thought that was right," I said, letting worry creep into my voice. "But maybe I made a mistake. It's getting harder to keep track of everything since Harold died." And I swear, I saw something like satisfaction flash across her face when I said that. Like she was happy I was struggling, pleased that I was admitting to problems with basic tasks. "That's completely understandable," she says in that fake sweet voice, suddenly all sympathy and concern. Managing finances can be tricky, especially when you're dealing with grief and stress. Maybe it would help if Michael or I could assist with some of these details. Take some of the burden off your shoulders. Help. Right. What she meant was take over completely, get access to my accounts, control how my money was spent. But I acted like her offer was a relief instead of a threat. "That's very kind of you to offer," I said, making my voice sound grateful instead of suspicious. "I don't want to be a burden, but maybe some help would be good." And all the while, the camera hidden in my kitchen was recording every word, every fake expression of concern, every attempt to undermine my confidence in my own abilities. But I was recording much more than just Melissa's manipulations. I was documenting their private conversations, the ones they had when they thought I couldn't hear them or was too confused to understand what they were really talking about. Like the time I heard them in my living room discussing timeline and market conditions and optimal timing for listing, or when Melissa mentioned driving through neighborhoods to look at nursing homes and care facilities, evaluating them based on cost rather than quality of care. Or when Michael talked about meeting with someone about asset evaluation and liquidation strategies. These weren't the conversations of concerned family members worried about my safety and well-being. These were the conversations of people planning a business transaction, with my home and my independence as the commodities being bought and sold. Then came the morning I'll never forget as long as I live. It was a Thursday in December, cold and gray, almost a year into this whole charade I'd been playing. I was upstairs in my bedroom, supposedly taking my afternoon nap, which had become part of my routine as a supposedly declining old woman, when I heard them come in through the front door. They had a key by then, something else I'd agreed to for safety reasons. After Melissa had convinced me, I might have an emergency and need someone to check on me. What she didn't mention was that they'd use that key to let themselves in whenever they wanted to have private conversations about my future. I could hear them talking in the living room right below my bedroom, where I'd positioned one of my best recording devices. Their voices were low but clear, and what I heard made my blood run absolutely cold. "Dr. Wells thinks we have enough documentation now," Michael was saying. Dr. Wells was this geriatric care manager they brought in to evaluate me a few weeks earlier, supposedly to help assess what kind of support I might need to continue living independently. I played my confused old lady role perfectly during that evaluation, acting forgetful and uncertain, while she asked me questions about my daily routine and my ability to manage household tasks. The assessment results, the financial concerns Melissa's documented, that incident with the stove last week, She thinks it all adds up to a clear case for guardianship. That was perfect, Melissa says, and I can hear her practically gloating in her voice. When I told her about finding the burner left on with nothing on it, her whole attitude changed. That's exactly the kind of safety issue that supports an incompetency case. Now here's the thing, and this is important, there was no incident with the stove. None. I'm very careful in the kitchen, always have been, and I never leave burners on unattended. Melissa made the whole thing up, completely fabricated it out of thin air. But apparently she'd reported it to this Dr. Wells woman as evidence that I was becoming dangerous to myself and others. I'm lying there in my bed, listening to my daughter-in-law admit to making up stories about me to healthcare professionals, and I realize she's willing to lie to doctors to build her case against me. This isn't just manipulation or pressure tactics. This is fraud. So what's the timeline now? Melissa continues, and I can hear papers rustling like they're looking at documents or schedules. I found a realtor who thinks we can get at least $600,000 for the house, maybe more if we do some cosmetic updates first. The market is hot right now, but it won't stay that way forever. $600,000. That's what my home was worth to them. Not the place where Harold proposed to me on one knee by the fireplace he'd built himself. Not where we brought our babies home from the hospital and watched them take their first steps. Not where we celebrated 47 Christmases together and planned for the retirement we'd never get to share. Just $600,000 they could put in their pockets. Dr. Wells thinks we should file the guardianship petition right after the holidays, Michael says, and his voice sounds so businesslike, so matter-of-fact, like he's discussing a real estate transaction instead of destroying his mother's life. It looks less harsh if we wait until after Christmas. More like we gave her time to make the adjustment on her own first. That's smart, Melissa agrees. And Shady Oaks has an opening in February. The timing works out perfectly. Shady Oaks. I knew that place. It was one of the cheaper nursing homes in the area, the kind of place where they warehouse old people instead of actually caring for them. Not one of the nice facilities with activities and gardens and decent food. The kind of place you put someone when you want them out of the way as economically as possible. Perfect, Melissa says again. And you're sure she won't be able to fight it? I mean legally. Mom barely understands her own finances anymore, Michael says. And there's something almost like satisfaction in his voice. By the time we get court approval for the guardianship, she'll probably be grateful someone else is handling everything. She might not even remember that she used to object to the idea. I'm lying there in my bed, listening to my own son plan to steal my house and lock me away in a substandard nursing home. And they're talking about it like they're planning a vacation. No guilt, no conflict, no second thoughts about what they're doing to me. Just excitement about the money they were going to make and relief that I'd be out of their way permanently. But here's what they didn't know, and this is the best part of the whole story, their entire plan was built on something that didn't exist anymore. See, 8 months earlier, right after I started recording them and realized what they were really up to, I'd gone to see my lawyer James Patterson. James had been handling our family's legal work for 20 years, knew Harold and me since before Michael was born. He'd drawn up our wills, handled the paperwork when we refinanced the house, taken care of all the legal details when Harold died. If anyone was going to help me protect myself from my own family, it would be James. I called his office and told his secretary I needed to make some changes to my estate planning, that I was concerned about potential challenges to my competency, and wanted to explore asset protection strategies. She fit me in that same afternoon. I drove myself to his office, parked perfectly between the lines, walked in without assistance, carrying a briefcase full of documentation I'd prepared myself. I wasn't the shuffling, confused woman my family thought I was becoming. I was a sharp, organized client with a clear understanding of my needs and objectives. James, I said when we sat down in his office, I need to tell you something, and I need you to help me figure out how to protect myself legally. And then I told him everything. About the pressure to sell my house and move into a care facility. About the constant undermining of my confidence and competence. About the campaign to establish my supposed incompetence as a pretext for taking control of my assets. I played him some of the recordings I'd made on my phone during some of the more egregious conversations, where Michael and Melissa discussed my situation, as if I weren't in the room. By the end of our meeting, James was shaking his head in disgust. This is more common than you'd think, Martha. he said. Adult children who convince themselves they know what's best, while they're really just looking out for their own financial interests. The law calls it financial elder abuse, and it's a serious crime. But James had a solution. We're going to set up an irrevocable trust, he explained. You'll transfer ownership of your house to the trust, but you'll retain the right to live there for the rest of your life. The property will be protected from forced sale, even if someone gets guardianship over you. Basically, I'd be giving my house to a legal entity that nobody could touch, not even me. I keep the right to live there, maintain it, make all decisions about its use, but technically it wouldn't belong to me anymore. Which meant Michael and Melissa could get themselves appointed as my guardians from here to Sunday, and they still couldn't force a sale to pay for nursing home care. We also set up a comprehensive estate plan with detailed instructions about my care preferences, named my daughter Sarah, who lives across the country and has no financial interest in my property, as my healthcare proxy and financial decision-maker if I ever became unable to make decisions for myself. But the most important thing James did was arrange for me to have a complete psychiatric evaluation with a geriatric specialist. 3 hours of cognitive tests, memory assessments, interviews about my life and decision-making process, medical review, the whole 9 yards. The doctor who did the evaluation was one of the top experts in the field, someone whose opinion would carry serious weight in any legal proceeding. The results were unequivocal. Not only was I completely competent and mentally sharp, but I tested above average for someone my age in most cognitive areas. No signs of dementia, no evidence of impaired judgment, no indication of any condition that would justify removing my autonomy. If anyone ever questions your mental capacity, James told me when we got the results, we have professional documentation that you were not only competent when you made these decisions, but that you made them for sound, rational reasons in response to a genuine threat to your independence. The trust was executed on a Tuesday morning in October. By Tuesday afternoon, my house legally belonged to an entity that neither Michael nor Melissa could touch, regardless of what happened to my supposed mental state. I had protected not just my property, but my right to remain in it for the rest of my life. Now I just had to wait for them to make their move, and I wouldn't have to wait long. 2 weeks later, Michael arrived for what I thought was a routine visit, but Melissa wasn't with him this time. Instead, he brought someone I didn't recognize, a middle-aged professional woman carrying a clipboard and wearing the kind of sympathetic expression healthcare workers practice for difficult conversations. "Mom," Michael said, settling into the chair across from me in my living room like this was just a casual visit. "This is Dr. Patricia Wells. She's a geriatric care manager, and I asked her to stop by to meet you and talk about how you're managing here at home." Dr. Wells smiled warmly and extended her hand. "Mrs. Henderson, your son has told me so much about you. He's very concerned about your well-being, and I'd love to chat with you about how things are going with daily activities, managing the house, that sort of thing." I let confusion cloud my features, the same confused look I'd been practicing for months. "I'm sorry, I don't understand. Managing what? Is there something wrong?" "Not wrong exactly," Dr. Wells said gently, sitting down and opening her clipboard. "Your son mentioned that you've been having some memory issues lately, maybe feeling a little overwhelmed with maintaining such a large home. That's completely normal for someone your age, and there are lots of ways we can help make things easier." I looked from her to Michael, letting worry crease my forehead like I was genuinely puzzled and concerned. "Memory issues? Michael, what did you tell her about me?" Michael shifted uncomfortably in his chair, probably because he was having to lie to my face while pretending to be concerned about my welfare. "Just that you've seemed confused lately, Mom. Forgetting things, repeating yourself, having trouble with some of the household tasks you used to handle easily. We talked about this." "Did we?" I asked, looking genuinely puzzled because as far as I knew, we'd never had any such conversation. "I'm sorry, I don't remember talking about that." And there it was. Dr. Wells and Michael exchanged one of those looks. Exactly the kind of look I'd been setting them up for with months of carefully orchestrated confusion, like they were both thinking, "See? There's the proof we needed." For the next hour, Dr. Wells asked me questions designed to figure out if I could still live on my own safely. Could I manage my medications? Did I remember to eat regular meals? Was I keeping up with housework and bill paying? How was I handling the loss of my husband? I answered some questions right, missed others by just a little bit, And every now and then I'd pause like I couldn't quite get my thoughts organized. I wasn't trying to seem like I had severe dementia or anything. That would have been too obvious and they might have wanted to hospitalize me right away. Instead, I presented myself as someone in the early stages of decline. Still functioning but clearly starting to struggle with things I used to handle easily. "Well, Mrs. Henderson," Dr. Wells said finally, putting her pen down and giving me one of those professional smiles, "you're doing remarkably well considering everything you've been through. Losing a spouse is one of life's most difficult challenges, and it's completely normal to feel overwhelmed sometimes." I nodded, trying to look grateful for her understanding. "But I can see some areas where additional support might be helpful," she continued. "Have you given any thought to exploring senior living options? There are many different types of communities these days. Places where you could maintain your independence while having support available when you need it." "Senior living?" I repeated like the concept was foreign to me. "You mean like a nursing home?" "Not necessarily," she said quickly, "probably because nursing homes have such a bad reputation. There are assisted living facilities, continuing care communities, memory care units, places where you could have your own apartment but also have help with meals, medications, housekeeping, that sort of thing. Social activities too, so you wouldn't be so isolated." I looked to Michael, letting uncertainty and fear show in my eyes like I was a child looking to a parent for guidance. "Do you think I need to be in a place like that?" Michael reached over and took my hand, putting on his most caring expression. "We just want what's best for you, Mom. And maybe it would be good to look at some options just to see what's available. No pressure, just information gathering." That evening after they left, I sat in my kitchen reviewing the recording the hidden camera had captured. Dr. Wells had been professional and her assessment was within the normal range of what you'd expect for someone evaluating an older person living alone. But the context made it clear this wasn't really about my well-being. This was about establishing a professional opinion that would support the narrative Michael and Melissa had been building for months. Over the next few weeks, they escalated their campaign even more. Michael started calling twice a day now, always with detailed questions about my daily activities. Had I taken my morning pills? What did I have for breakfast? Did I remember to turn off the coffee maker? Had I checked the mail? Each call felt like an interrogation disguised as concern. And Melissa stepped up her unannounced visits, always finding new reasons to be worried about my competence. She'd discover problems that didn't exist and express concern about things that were perfectly normal. Like the time she came into my kitchen and started going through my refrigerator, pulling out a container of yogurt that was 2 days past its expiration date. "Martha, honey," she said, holding it up like it was evidence of criminal negligence, "this yogurt has gone bad. What if you'd eaten this? You could have gotten seriously ill." Now, anyone with half a brain knows that yogurt is usually fine for several days after the expiration date, especially if it's been refrigerated properly. But Melissa acted like finding slightly expired yogurt was proof that I was too confused to shop for groceries safely. "I guess I didn't notice the date," I said, letting embarrassment creep into my voice. "I used to be so good at keeping track of these things." "It's not your fault," she said in that patronizing tone I'd grown to hate. "These things happen as we get older. Our minds don't work quite as sharply as they used to. That's why it's so important to have people checking on us, making sure we're safe." But the whole time she was lecturing me about food safety, my hidden camera was recording every word, documenting how she was manufacturing problems where none existed, turning normal household situations into evidence of my supposed incompetence. The same thing happened with my mail. Melissa would go through the stack on my kitchen counter and find a bill that was due in 10 days, then act concerned that I hadn't paid it yet. "Are you having trouble keeping track of your bills, Martha? This electric bill is due soon. Did you forget about it?" Of course I hadn't forgotten about it. I've been paying bills for 50 years, and I know the difference between a bill that's due tomorrow and one that's due next week. But Melissa was creating a narrative where my normal bill-paying routine became evidence of confusion and poor planning. Or she'd find a piece of mail I hadn't opened yet, maybe something that came yesterday that I planned to deal with today, and she'd act worried that I was letting things pile up or avoiding important correspondence, like I was supposed to open every piece of mail the second it arrived instead of dealing with it when I had time. Every visit, every phone call, every interaction was being turned into evidence for their case that I was no longer competent to live independently. But what they didn't know was that I was building my own case against them, documenting every lie, every manipulation, every attempt to undermine my confidence and independence. Then came the breakthrough I'd been waiting for. It was that cold Thursday morning in December when I overheard them talking in my living room, discussing their timeline and their plans to file for guardianship. But there was more to that conversation than just the nursing home and real estate talk. After I heard them discussing Dr. Wells and the fabricated stove incident and the $600,000 they expected to get from my house, I kept listening. "The only thing that worries me," Melissa said, "is if she tries to fight it. I mean, what if she gets her own lawyer or something?" "She won't," Michael said, and he sounded so confident, so sure of himself. "Mom's always trusted me to handle things for her. Even when Dad was alive, she'd ask my advice about financial decisions. And now, with her mind going the way it is, she'll probably be relieved to have someone else take over the responsibility. But what if someone else puts ideas in her head? What if that neighbor of hers, what's her name, Betty? What if Betty tells her she should fight it? Betty's 85 years old and minds her own business," Michael said dismissively. "And besides, who's going to believe Mom is competent after everything we've documented? The failed driving, the financial confusion, the safety issues, Dr. Wells' assessment, it's an airtight case." Failed driving. He was talking about my minor fender bender like it was evidence of serious impairment instead of a common accident that happens to drivers of all ages. Financial confusion. He meant the times Melissa had questioned perfectly normal expenses and made me doubt my own competence. Safety issues, the fabricated stove incident that never happened. "I just want to make sure we've covered all our bases," Melissa said. "This house is worth too much money to take any chances. If she fights the guardianship and wins, we're back to square one. She's not going to fight it," Michael said again. "And even if she tried, what judge is going to side with a confused old woman over her loving son, who just wants to make sure she's safe and cared for?" That's when I realized they weren't just planning to steal my house. They were counting on the legal system to help them do it. They expected judges and lawyers and social workers to automatically side with the younger family member over the older person, to assume that age equals incompetence and that adult children always have their parents' best interests at heart. They were betting that nobody would look too closely at their motives or question their evidence. They figured the system was rigged in their favor, and unfortunately, they were probably right about that in most cases. But they had no idea what they were actually up against. 3 days later, I called James Patterson and told him it was time to put our plan into action. "They're filing for guardianship after the holidays," I told him. "I have recordings of them discussing the whole scheme. The fake evidence, the plans to sell my house, the nursing home they've picked out. Everything we need to stop them." "Do you have the psychiatric evaluation results?" James asked. "Right here in my file cabinet, along with copies of all the trust documents and the evidence I've been gathering for the past year." "Then let's give them a surprise they'll never forget." The guardianship hearing was scheduled for January 15th. Michael served me with the papers on New Year's Day. What a way to start the year, right? This formal petition asking the court to declare me mentally incompetent and grant him legal authority over my person and my property. The petition was supported by statements from Dr. Wells describing my supposed cognitive decline and safety concerns. There were affidavits from Michael and Melissa detailing all the incidents they'd observed or manufactured. The driving accident, the financial confusion, the household management problems, the repeated questions, the apparent memory lapses. Reading through their version of my life was like looking at a funhouse mirror. They'd taken every normal aspect of aging, every minor mistake or moment of uncertainty, every time I'd acted confused as part of my performance, and they'd woven it all together into a picture of a woman who was completely incapable of caring for herself. When Michael explained what was happening, I seemed confused and frightened, like I didn't understand the legal process, or what it would mean for my life. When he assured me that this was just to help me, to make sure I was properly taken care of, I appeared grateful and relieved, like the idea of someone else taking responsibility was actually comforting. "You won't have to worry about anything anymore, Mom," he said, patting my hand like I was a child. "I'll handle all the finances, all the decisions about your care. You can just focus on staying healthy and enjoying your retirement." When he suggested I didn't need a lawyer because this was just a formality to make sure I was protected, I nodded trustingly. Like the idea of legal representation had never occurred to me. What Michael didn't know was that James Patterson was going to be at that hearing, armed with enough evidence to blow their case apart completely. The morning of the hearing, Michael picked me up at home, probably expecting to escort a confused, helpless old woman to her own legal execution. I had dressed carefully for the occasion, a little shabby, like I was losing track of how to put myself together properly. My hair wasn't quite combed right, my cardigan didn't match my skirt, and I carried myself with that uncertain shuffle of someone whose confidence had been systematically destroyed. "Don't worry, Mom," Michael said as we walked into the courthouse, his voice full of false reassurance. "This is just going to help make sure you're taken care of properly. Dr. Wells will explain everything to the judge, and then we can get you moved into a nice place where you'll be safe and comfortable." I smiled at him with the trusting expression of a woman who had no idea what was about to happen to her life, who believed her son was acting in her best interests instead of his own. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with wood paneling and harsh fluorescent lighting that made everything look cold and institutional. Michael's attorney was there at one table with a thick stack of papers, all the evidence of my incompetence they'd been collecting for months. Dr. Wells sat in the witness area, dressed professionally and carrying her own folder of documentation. Melissa was in the gallery wearing her most conservative outfit and an expression of sorrowful concern, like she was attending a funeral instead of a legal proceeding. But at the defendant's table sat James Patterson with his own stack of papers and a laptop computer. When Michael saw him there, his face went completely white. "Mom," he said, his voice shaky with sudden panic, "why is Mr. Patterson here?" I looked around the courtroom with manufactured confusion, like I was a lost old lady who didn't understand what was happening. "I don't know, dear. Maybe he has another case today." Michael tried to approach James before the hearing started, probably to find out what was going on, but James just smiled politely and said he'd explain everything to the court when it was time. The hearing began with Michael's attorney presenting their case against me. They painted this detailed picture of a woman in serious cognitive decline, who could no longer manage her own affairs safely. A woman who was at risk living alone in a large house, who was making poor financial decisions, who needed the protection that only court-ordered guardianship could provide. Dr. Wells took the stand and testified about her evaluation of me, describing concerning signs of memory loss, confusion about daily tasks, and poor judgment about safety issues. She spoke professionally and compassionately, genuinely believing she was helping protect a vulnerable older woman from her own declining faculties. Then Melissa testified about all the incidents she'd observed during her visits to my home. The expired food in my refrigerator, the bills that seemed confusing to me, the appliances left on, the repeated questions and conversations. She painted herself as a caring daughter-in-law who was worried about my safety and well-being, who had tried to help but realized the problems were beyond what family support could address. Michael testified about my increasing confusion and forgetfulness, about his growing concerns for my safety living alone, about his reluctant conclusion that I needed professional care in a supervised environment. He presented himself as a loving son who was heartbroken about having to take legal action against his own mother, but who felt he had no choice given my deteriorating condition. It was actually a pretty compelling case. Professional, well-documented, presented with apparent sincerity and genuine concern. If I hadn't known the truth about their motives and methods, I might have been convinced myself that guardianship was the right solution. Then the judge asked if I had representation. James Patterson stood up and said, in a clear, strong voice that carried throughout the courtroom, "Your Honor, I represent Mrs. Henderson, and we'd like to contest this petition on the grounds that it's based on fabricated evidence and attempted financial exploitation." You should have seen the looks on their faces. Michael looked like he was going to throw up right there in court. Melissa looked like she'd been hit by a truck, and was still trying to figure out what had happened. Even Dr. Wells seemed surprised, probably wondering how a woman with significant cognitive decline had managed to hire legal representation without her family's knowledge. Furthermore, James continued, we have extensive documentation that this guardianship petition isn't motivated by concern for Mrs. Henderson's well-being, but by the petitioner's desire to gain control of her real estate assets for their own financial benefit. For the next 2 hours, James systematically destroyed their case piece by piece. He played recordings of Michael and Melissa discussing their plans to sell my house and institutionalize me for profit. He showed evidence of how Melissa had fabricated incidents like the stove being left on. He demonstrated how they had taken normal activities and twisted them into evidence of incompetence. But the crown jewel of his presentation was the psychiatric evaluation I'd had done 8 months earlier. Complete documentation from a respected geriatric specialist that I was not only mentally competent but exceptionally sharp for someone my age, with no signs of dementia or cognitive decline whatsoever. Your Honor, James said, Mrs. Henderson isn't suffering from dementia or mental decline. She's suffering from family members who have been systematically trying to convince everyone, including her, that she's incompetent so they can steal her home and her independence. This is a textbook case of financial elder abuse disguised as family concern. Then the judge asked me to approach the bench. I walked forward, but this time I didn't shuffle or look confused. I stood straight, looked him directly in the eye, and spoke in a clear, strong voice that filled the courtroom. Your Honor, everything Mr. Patterson has said is absolutely true. I've been pretending to be confused and declining because it was the only way to protect myself from people who were supposed to love me but were actually plotting against me. I'm not incompetent. I'm not in mental decline. I'm a woman who discovered that her own family was scheming to steal her home, and I did what I had to do to stop them. The judge was quiet for a long moment, reviewing all the evidence James had presented. You could have heard a pin drop in that courtroom. Finally, he looked up at Michael and his attorney with an expression of barely controlled anger. This petition is not only denied, but I'm ordering an immediate investigation into potential elder abuse and fraud. The evidence clearly shows that the petitioners have engaged in systematic manipulation and attempted financial exploitation of Mrs. Henderson, including the fabrication of incidents to support their claims of her incompetence. Michael jumped up from his chair, desperation written all over his face. Your Honor, this is all a terrible misunderstanding. We were only trying to help my mother. We thought she needed. Sit down, Mr. Henderson, the judge said sharply. You've said quite enough for one day. Then he turned back to me with a much gentler expression. Mrs. Henderson, I'm issuing a restraining order preventing these individuals from entering your home or contacting you without your express written permission. If you feel you need additional protection or if there are any violations of this order, contact the court immediately. Walking out of that courthouse was one of the greatest moments of my 72 years of life. I felt like I just climbed Mount Everest or won the lottery or discovered the cure for cancer. I had faced down people who wanted to steal everything I had, and I had beaten them at their own game using nothing but my wits and careful planning. Michael tried to approach me in the hallway outside the courtroom, his face desperate and panicked. Mom, please, you have to understand, we never meant to hurt you. We genuinely thought we were helping. We thought you needed protection. What I needed, I told him, looking him straight in the eye, was a son who respected me enough to listen when I said I didn't want to leave my home. What I got was a son who decided to steal it from me instead. Melissa was there too, crying big crocodile tears and trying to salvage something from the wreckage. Martha, please, this has all been a terrible misunderstanding. We love you. We would never intentionally hurt you. We were just worried. I have recordings of you discussing how much money you'd make selling my house, I interrupted. I have proof that you lied to healthcare professionals about incidents that never happened. I have documentation of your systematic campaign to undermine my confidence and independence. This wasn't a misunderstanding, Melissa. This was theft, plain and simple. I turned to walk away, then looked back at them one more time. You know what the saddest part is? If you had simply respected my choice to stay in my own home, if you had offered genuine help instead of trying to take control, I would have welcomed you in my life. I would have been grateful for your support. But you didn't see me as a person with rights and dignity. You saw me as an obstacle to money you thought you deserved. That evening I sat in my living room, in my house surrounded by all my things and my memories, and I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in over a year. The recording devices were still there, still operational, but I wouldn't need them anymore. The threat had been neutralized, not through luck or outside intervention, but through careful planning and strategic thinking. I had protected not just my house, but my right to make my own decisions about my own life. I had proven that age doesn't automatically equal vulnerability, that wisdom and experience can be powerful weapons against those who would exploit us. In the months that followed, I connected with other older adults who had faced similar situations. Some had been less fortunate than I was. They had lost their homes, their independence, their dignity to family members who convinced themselves that theft was love and control was protection. Through my volunteer work with an elder rights organization, I learned that the tactics Michael and Melissa had used were part of a well-established pattern that plays out in families across the country every day. The systematic undermining of confidence, the manufactured evidence of incompetence, the gradual isolation from support systems, and ultimately, the legal action to remove all autonomy. But I also learned something else that gave me hope. We are not as powerless as our abusers want us to believe. Age does not automatically confer vulnerability, and families don't have the right to steal from their elders just because those elders need occasional help or support. There are resources available, legal protections in place, and people who understand what's happening and know how to fight back. The key is recognizing the warning signs early and taking action before the situation becomes irreversible. About 6 months after the hearing, I received a letter from Michael. It was tentative and remorseful, asking if we could find a way to rebuild our relationship. He acknowledged that he had let Melissa's influence cloud his judgment, that he had confused his own financial anxieties with concern for my well-being. He said he missed me, missed being part of my life, missed the relationship we'd had before everything went wrong. I thought about that letter for weeks before responding. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let the natural consequences of his actions stand without mitigation. But a larger part of me remembered the little boy I'd raised, the young man who had called me every Sunday for 20 years, the son who had held my hand at Harold's funeral and promised he would always be there for me. I wrote back. Not forgiveness, that would take much longer if it came at all, but an acknowledgement that people can change, that families can heal, that love can survive betrayal if both parties are willing to do the hard work of rebuilding trust. Michael and I meet once a month now for lunch at a restaurant halfway between our homes. We don't talk about the house or my living situation or any of the legal mess we went through. Instead, we talk about books, about current events, about memories of Harold and the life we all shared before everything became complicated by greed and fear. It's not the same relationship we had before. That innocence is gone forever. But it's honest now, built on mutual respect instead of assumptions about what I can and can't handle. In some ways, it's better than what we had before, because it's grounded in reality rather than in roles and expectations. Melissa and I have no relationship, and I'm completely fine with that arrangement. Some things can't be repaired. Some violations of trust are too fundamental to forgive. I don't wish her ill, but I don't need her presence in my life to be happy or fulfilled. I still live in my house, the house Harold and I built together over 47 years of marriage. I tend my garden, read in my favorite chair, host Sunday dinners for friends who respect my autonomy and celebrate my independence. I'm not rattling around in too much space. I'm living fully in the life I chose, surrounded by the memories I cherish, protected by the wisdom I earned through betrayal and recovery. The recording equipment is put away now, stored in a closet where I can access it quickly if needed. I don't need to document conversations or gather evidence or prepare for legal battles anymore. But I keep it handy because I learned something valuable during those months of performance and strategy. Sometimes the only way to protect yourself from people who claim to love you is to know exactly what they're capable of, and to be prepared to defend yourself when necessary. And I learned something else, something I share with every older adult I meet who's questioning their own competence in the face of family pressure. You are not as helpless as people want you to think you are. Your age is not a disability. Your need for occasional help is not evidence of global incompetence. And your right to make your own decisions about your own life doesn't expire when you reach a certain birthday. We are not obstacles to our family's financial planning. We are not burdens to be managed or problems to be solved. We are people with rights and dignity and accumulated wisdom, and anyone who can't see that doesn't deserve access to our lives or our resources. I'm 73 years old now, and I have never been more certain of my own worth and capabilities. The woman who was supposedly losing her mind found her strength instead. The mother who was too confused to manage her own affairs outmaneuvered people 40 years younger and infinitely more arrogant. They thought I was vulnerable because of my age. They thought I was weak because of my grief. They thought I was naive because I loved my family and trusted them to have my best interests at heart. They were wrong about everything that mattered. And in the end, that's what saved me and everything I hold dear.